Hi, hello. I don't see myself. I hope that you can see me and you can hear me. Can you?
Yes, we can see you and you.
Excellent. So it's a pleasure to be here. For us, it's a morning. For you, it's noontime. So I hope that I won't take too much time before lunch. And I was requested to talk about Digital Living 2030. Digital Living 2030 is a project that Tel Aviv University runs with Stanford. And specifically, I will talk about the role and the challenges of artificial intelligence in this project. Now, I'm running the lab of AI, machine learning, business and data analytics at Tel Aviv University. This is LAMBDA, and I'm going to talk a little bit about LAMBDA, then talk about the project, the main challenges that we are facing, and I will hopefully be able to give at least one or two examples of applications within this project. And then we can summarize and have some questions. Any remark or questions about the agenda? Okay. Please feel free, guys, to stop me at any time. So as I mentioned, LAMBDA is the Laboratory of AI Machine Learning, Business and Data Analytics at the University of Tel Aviv, the Faculty of Engineering. And what we try to do is to get inspiration and a real problem from the industry and combine it in an academic research. You can see some of the companies that we are working with. There are actually many others, some of them in the area of telecommunication, transportation, retail, banking, and so on. And the idea is that if there is a problem that is significant and hard enough to justify a thesis, then we form a group of the student and the supervisor. I have some of my colleagues participating in this effort, including a representative from a company that can provide data and insight about the problem. And the type of problems that we are addressing are quite diverse. We are, for example, talking right now with companies and conducting research around human mobility patterns. Maybe I can show part of it in smart cities, anomaly detection in production lines and in smart cities, process monitoring, sensor and feature selection, more theoretical work around deep learning that is related to a financial time series and how much information you can gain from one financial time series about the other. Wireless body area network is a project that I will talk more about it. HR analytics, diffusion of information in social networks, cybersecurity, and many, many, many more. So I think that the part that represent all those projects is the idea that we combine data science with applications, industrial or service applications, with strong emphasis on the usage by people. Now, digital living came from the thought that we are all aware that reality is changing and changing fast. It's amazing to think that 10 to 15 years ago there were no iPhones, so people were actually working, entertaining, interacting in a very different way than it is today. So we all know how it changed our life. And the same way, if you think about companies and innovation in companies, you can realize that things were changing quite rapidly in the last decades. And there is a shift towards digitization. So, if you look at, and we looked at articles that describe innovation around those years that you can see in the screen. In the 80s, you could see many companies that are basically physical companies. They deal with energy, they deal with vehicles, they deal with artifacts. They are all present in the physical world. So you can find General Motors, General Electric, ExxonMobil, Ford Motors, and so on. Then a decade later, you can see a lot of innovation in companies that opened the digital area. In the beginning, it was the hardware company like HP and IBM and Intel and Dell and more. And then came a software company like Apple and Microsoft and Google and so on. And what you can see in the last decade is that many of the innovative companies are actually playing both in the physical world and in the digital world. So basically, companies like Amazon are extremely interesting, not only due to the fact that they have a search engine and a very strong presence in the internet, but at the same time, they hold maybe the largest supply chain on the planet. So this combination of digital presence and physical infrastructure is making Amazon such a large company. If you look at Alibaba, the way that they, in one hand, they started as an internet company, but the way that they proceed now to physical retail and to physical interactions with businesses, you can realize that they are also moving towards this direction. Google, if you think about Google, Google started as a software company, but today it became Alphabet, and they are suddenly dealing with autonomous vehicle and things that are actually in the physical world. So they took the reverse path from the digital to the physical, physical. Uber, of course, is a very good example because, again, they solve a physical problem. They move people from place to place, or they move packages or materials from place to place. However, they do it in a digital way. They map the physical world into the digital space. They solve the problem of how best they can transfer people and material from place A to place B. And then they send back the solution as an instructions to the drivers that can actually execute it in the physical world. So basically, the idea of all those companies, including companies that started in Israel, startups like Waze and Mobileye, is to take a problem which is physical, model it in a digital world, solve it very fast, and then project back the solution to the physical world. This is basically the essence of modeling that we see around us. And of course, when you do such a process, the main tool to solve the problem in a digital world, in many cases, rely on AI. The AI is actually the brain where you try to solve a problem in the digital space, you need AI. And this is basically the environment that we find ourselves living. And this was the background that led us to launch this Digital Living 2030 project. Any question about this slide or anything else? Okay, so Digital Living 2030 was launched by Tel Aviv University in Stanford, led at Stanford by Professor Nick Bambos, and in Tel Aviv by myself, with a very long list of distinguished researchers, and some of them you can see in the picture, and you can have also the names. And the idea was that we are going to form groups around 3 buckets of issues. I'll talk about it in a moment. And we are going to create an interdisciplinary group that have basically a different type of researchers. Some of the guys are data science, so they know how to deal with a large amount of data and map, again, the physical world to the digital space and so on. Some of them are applied mathematicians, OR people, operation research, because when you solve the problem, once you have it in a digital way, you need a mathematical formulation and optimization. And part of the guys are human factor people. So people that take into account that eventually all those innovations will result in some application where a human being who is a critical part, is the main user, is the main attention of the application, and you need to build the application in a correct way, such that it can use it in a cost-effective manner. And this is this blend of people, data scientists, applied mathematicians, and OR, and human factors, is something that we found to be very relevant for this project, and something that is also represent well the faculty members in Tel Aviv and in Stanford, in the Department of in Tel Aviv in the Department of Industrial Engineering, and in Stanford in the Department of Management Science and Engineering. Now, as I mentioned, we thought that we should divide the research, those research teams, to address 3 main topics. Although I must say that as we proceed, the borders or the lines between those areas are getting blurry, and we find research that is actually related to some of them, sometimes all of them together. But the idea was to have research around smart environment and infrastructure. So all the physical and the digital networks that enable application like smart transportation, smart cities, smart mobility, and so on. So this is the first part of the bucket. I don't know if you can see. Do you see my mouse? Can you see my mouse? No, I think that. So this is the environmental infrastructure triangle that you see on the right lower corner. Then there is this social organization triangle that focuses around new social infrastructure that can support interactions between people. So, if we think about social networks today, they are mainly used to share information, to share experiences, to share stories, if you want. However, we are still not in a position where we are using those large infrastructure to support a real decision process. Think about running a small neighborhood. Can you use a social network to enable each citizen in that neighborhood to take part in the decision that are taken? So, for example, which roads to open, which roads to develop, how to build, a kindergarten or a garden in the city. All those decisions that usually are left to the representative that once in a few years you are replacing could be represented in a dynamic environment where people can actually either themselves or their agents, their AI agent can take part and interact and make a lot of decisions. So I'm talking about a neighborhood, but in fact it can be at a level of a country. Again, we all are used to select our representative, and I know that both India and Israel, we had election not far away, and then, you know, for 4 years we are left behind, and our representative are making the decision. But in fact, we could, if we can train an AI agent that represent our need, it could be part of a longer decision process, a dynamic decision process that is happening all the time. And when you do so, there are a lot of questions that are suddenly jump into one's mind. The first is, you know, how to construct it not only efficiently from the engineering side, but how to do it while you consider ethical decision. You can think about many of those decisions that can be taken instantaneously. So, for example, a dynamic light system in the road. Can you take a lot of information and change it dynamically in a way that some people will gain more, a faster access to the road while others not? Can you do it in an ethical way? So many questions that are not only focused on engineering. When you talk about social infrastructure and decision making are relevant. I'll talk more about it maybe at the end if we can, if we'll have time to talk about a specific application when we try to address an interesting question. Is wisdom of the crowd always a good scheme to make decision in larger scale, or are there better and smarter ways to make a decision and under which circumstances? So all of it is around the social infrastructure that will represent our lives in, let's say, 10, 15 years. This is why it is called Digital Living 2030. And the last bucket, of course, of research is represented by the top triangle. It's about ourselves. Eventually, we want to build application that will make our life better, will make our life better, not only, again, from an efficient perspective, having access to information, but can we actually provide some guidelines to create those applications to support a better well-being? So, for example, all of us are under constant attack from huge amount of emails and WhatsApps and social media. Can we create a system that can take care of some of this information for us? When you talk about individual well-being and individual health, you can think about monitoring system, individual monitoring that monitor our health, our well-being, and actually help us to maintain the balance between our private and our private life and work life. It also it is very much related to the way that modern work will be organized in 10, 15 years from now. It will be different from the way that we see them. So all these represent our view of Digital Living 2030, with many, many interesting problems that are related to, again, to gather a lot of data, to optimize a system, and to make sure that people can rely on it and enjoy from it. And this is the main essence and objective of the Digital Living 2030. And with this idea, we came to the correct foundation that was generous enough to support it with a very nice grant that will started a year ago and will last for 4 years more. so a total of 5 years, to support those research that I mentioned. Okay. So what I want to do is, if I have enough time, is to give you some examples in each of those directions. I'll start with an application related to environmental infrastructures, and specifically mobile robots. So mobile robots or autonomous vehicle are very popular, and people think about it as something that is totally new. But first, it's nice to see that even in the late 18th century, people were thinking about mobile robot. You can see those nice drawings. So people were thinking about a mobile robot in a different way. They visualized it in a different way that we see it today. This nice picture of Edward Ellis from 1868. But at the same time, you can see that in the electric dog represent a small, autonomous vehicle that was, I think, presented in 1919, and was basically moved or triggered by a beam of light. You can see in the left side a person that is moving that mobile robot by a beam of light. And in a way, many of the vehicles today, or the small, AGVs, they work either by light or by other sensors, but many of the concepts remain similar to those 100 years ago. So this is how people envision mobile robot. And when you look at, on a mobile robot in a modern life, people have a lot of other ideas. So I always like to show this movie. I don't know if you remember it, the Minority Report movie. Of Tom Cruise, those smart agents that are looking for suspects, those spiders that are moving and looking for a sign of any sign of a living creature that they can. So, I don't know if you remember. If you didn't see this movie, I urge you to see. By the way, many of the innovation that we see today, regarding AI agents and robotics and so on, they appear in movies, in science fiction movies. So even before it comes to science, people are inspired and have very good ideas, and it's always a source of inspiration. So this is how people saw mobile robot at those days. And what we thought, let me see, I don't see, there is a hidden slide somewhere. I don't see it. Let me see if I have a slide of how people think about mobile. I don't see that. Okay. So, today when people think about mobile robot, of course, autonomous vehicles are only one direction, but people are thinking about small agents that could bring food and beverages to the right place at the right time. Or they think about small vehicles that can actually take care of infrastructure. Or they think about small ambulances, again, autonomous ambulances that will move very rapidly to an area of an accident and could provide, first aid and so on. So, and in the same way, if you think about an infrastructure of smart cities, you can think about small robots that are moving on pipelines and fixing or finding problems in those water pipelines or sewage leakage in pipelines and so on. And the idea was that many of those new application, they require an interaction between a lot of those robots. And the idea was that in all those systems, what you really want to do is to create, again, a probability, a heat map that represent the reality in a digital way. And, you know, I have an example of such a map that shows in Germany areas that are prone to accidents. So people analyzed based on, again, on a lot of data. They analyzed the road system, and all those red places are places with congestion and places that are prone to accidents. So if you have such a heat map and you have, you know, a swarm of small robots, small ambulance robots, you can actually move them. Yeah, you can actually move them to those areas. And this is what you see. And in the same way, when you talk about smart cities, you can input a lot of information from the physical world to the digital one, like, for example, the transportation, the traffic, the temperature, feeds from social media and social networks, information from cellular data, and so on. So basically, you can actually create a heat map related to different applications. So the one that I was mentioning was related to autonomous ambulances. But you can think about a heat map that represent, you know, areas where you want, you know, a police agent, an autonomous police agent to be, in order to prevent the next crime. And again, I'm referring, if you didn't see this movie of Tom Cruise, again, you are, I think it was called Minor Reality or something like that. Minority Report. So all those applications can be very much relevant. Firefighters, water leakage in pipeline where, you know, autonomous robot will move around, and a lot of location-based services, you know, food and drinks, medicine, things that are now called last mile deliveries. All those micro motion, smart bicycles and scooters that can provide materials and move people in the last mile. So all of it can be related to this probability heat map, and you don't see a lot of research in this area. You see a lot around how to build a vehicle that can actually absorb information in a smart way, how to make the right decision when this vehicle is moving. But what about the swarm of robots, the way that they provide information to one another and the way that they move? And the idea was to, of course, based on this heat map, to create a mathematical model. I don't want to go into the details, of course, but just to explain that there are stochastic optimization schemes. If we talked about collecting the data and analyzing it, this is the data science part. But now you have the heat map, you have all this information, and now you need to optimize the system. So for example, if I go back to the ambulance use case, how you move those small ambulances, autonomous ambulances around the city. So you need to create a mathematical scheme that will get the model from the data, will optimize the movement of the swarm of robots, will take new measurement, will take some action, and action can be moving the vehicle to another area and actually sensing what's going on there, or integrating another source of information. This is another option of an action. And then based on the new information, absorbing it, updating the heat map, making a new decision, and moving forward. So it's a scheme, it's an ongoing scheme where you absorb information. There is a lot of the decisions are related to what we call reinforcement learning. How much you want to exploit the information that you have, for example, staying in the same condition and exploiting information, rather than moving and explore a new area. So there is a lot of work that is already available and can be applied to these cases. And the second thing that is very relevant is, are we going to support a central control scheme that absorbs all the information from all the vehicles and all the sensors in the smart cities in order to reach optimality? And of course, it creates a huge amount of challenges. So first, you have to collect all the information to one place. You have to merge it in the right way. You have to synchronize it. You create a lot of flow of information in different networks. You have to deal with energy because all those sensors are sensing all the time, and they should send it to this, central computer, so to speak. And then you need to make the decision and, disseminate and send them back to all the agents. And again, we are talking about decisions that are taken sometime in a tenth of the second, or even in a faster way. Can you do that? Or maybe a better way is to give some, autonomy when you control those swarms. And this is exactly what we were preaching and working when we wrote this book, Search and Foraging, that actually take into account that swarm of animals like ants that are looking for food are not controlled centrally. Each agent or each ant has its own sensors, and they send to each other some information by pheromone deploying mechanisms, such that they can actually control the movement of the swarm in a very optimal way. And this is exactly the type of algorithms that we find very much relevant for autonomous robots or autonomous agents or autonomous vehicles in many cases. Here you see those ants that are looking for food, and they signal to each other, and they are moving towards area. You see them standing when they found some food. And if you analyze it on a large scale, you see that this is a very efficient mechanism that solves a lot of the problem that I was mentioning before. It solves the problem of transferring all the information to a single place. It is much more robust. So if there is the network falls, it's not preventing any one of the agents on a local level to make decision and to move on. And again, there are 2 or 3 books that we wrote on this area. And again, what you can see, let me try to see if I can apply it. I'm not sure. Okay, the clip is not connected, but what you can see is 3 agents in the bottom, and you see the heat map that represent the target. In this case, it can be, again, either you can think about the next accident, or where the vehicle or the robot is a small ambulance, or you can think about the next crime. And each of the agents share a slightly different view of reality based on its own sensors and some of the information that he gathered from the network. And if I could run the clip, you could see that these 3 autonomous vehicles that are represented by those blue rectangles, they are moving and looking for the target that is also dynamic. If If the target is static, it's not moving, it's quite easy to find an optimal way to catch it. But if we are talking about a moving target, the problem becomes extremely difficult in a large scale. So this is one of the directions that I was mentioning. And another one would be, for example, the individual well-being part. And the idea was here again, based on a team that consists of data scientists, applied mathematician or OR, and human factors, is to think about all those devices and sensors that will be collecting information about our health. You know, it can be a trivial thing like blood pressure and bit rate, but you can think about glucose level. You can think about thousands of parameters that can be collected by sensors. Some of them wearable sensors, so you know, smart wearable. Some of them by sensor that will be implemented in our body and will be transmitted. They will transmit their information to phones or to smart watch or to other devices. And in a way, all this information will be collected and at some time should be sent to a center, some center, where decision can make and also where a learning on a larger scale can be taken. So, you know, if you think about those devices, they can learn the way that you as a human being is performing. But if you want to learn general trends about how people that are suffering, for example, from diabetes, how the stage of the glucose level is progressing in time, it's better to collect it from many, many people. So there is a lot of reasons to transfer some of the information to a center, to a general center that will learn it. And there are many ideas of, again, how do you activate all those sensors? Again, if you think about situation in 10 years from now, where potentially we could have thousands of sensors around us, both in the environment and in our wearable and in our body, it doesn't make sense that you need all to activate them all the time. It will create a lot of problem with energy, with radiation, and without necessarily providing new information. So the idea is to again, to find a scheme like the one that we discussed before with the mobile robots. So here again, optimization scheme where you operate those sensors in a way that you obtain accurate information, you save power. So power can be, again, related to simply electricity in those sensors that is or the energy that is sometimes limited, or it can be baud rate or capacity in the network of how much information you want to transfer. And at the same time you want to learn. So again, the main scheme of exploration, exploitation is also happening here. And you want to both to optimize the system and to learn it and to deal with the trade-off between monitoring accurately the state of the patient and at the same time saving power and capacity. And again, I don't want to go into the mathematical details, but what we have implemented is what we call partially observed Markov decision process, where basically we learn the state of the systems. And at each epoch, we update the information and we try to monitor as good as we can the state of the system. And what you see here this is an example of one patient, and we got real data related to diabetes patients with different level of glucose in their blood. And you can see, for example, here in this simulation, you can see the blue line that represents the glucose level in the blood of a patient that moved from stage 4 to stage 1. And what you can see in the dashed line here are the belief state of, or what is the belief state based on the sensors that we are operating regarding that patient. And you see that with small lags, actually, you can sense well the state of the system. And what you see on the bottom graph is the decision which type of sensors you're activating at each time. So, for example, maybe in the beginning, you're activating 4 sensors. So this is the number of sensors to learn quickly what is the state of the system. But then, at certain time, you don't need a lot of sensor. You need basically only 1 sensor, and maybe sometimes 2 sensors to learn about the patient. And of course, it is related to learning, because when you monitor one patient or many patients, you learn that there is a peak after lunch, and afterwards it gets back to the normal level. So you can use both the internal information and external information about other patients to personalize the monitoring scheme for that specific patient. Any question about this example of the body area network? Or the previous one, the one related to autonomous vehicles? Okay, I hope it's clear, and if not, again, please just interrupt and let me know. So the last one, again, I want to talk about, is an example of a social organization type of research. And this is the research I was referring to earlier when I talked about wisdom of the crowd. And again, if I have one slide, so I'll just give you the general sense of what we're trying to do here. So as you know well, wisdom of the crowd is based on the fact that if you collect information from a large group of people, you can, in many cases, reach a very good decision. And the classic example that people were using is if you want to estimate the height of some building. So you can show it to people, and someone will say, I think it's 15 meters, and others will say, no, it's 20 meters. And when you collect it, and a lot of people are joining this process, eventually you can converge to the right height of that building. So this is a very strong concept, and you can find it also in learning. When in learning we call it as ensemble, or boosting, or weak classifier. So if you take a lot of learning models that are basically weak, they are not so good, and you collect them together, and you make a decision based on all of them, in many ways you can improve your accuracy. However, in both cases, specifically the first one, in the wisdom of the crowd, the idea is that somehow there is a ground truth level, and people are symmetrically distributed around it. So if I talk again about the height of the building, the building might be 16 meters, and some people will think that it is higher, some people will think that it is lower. But eventually, if you collect enough information, you will reach the right estimation about the height of that building. However, in reality, in many cases, this assumption that people are distributed evenly around ground truth is not the case. And instead of calling it wisdom of the crowd, we actually thought of calling it wisdom in the crowd. And the idea is the following, that you might find area where only small portion of the population will know about it. So think about a situation where you release a medical case in the internet, and instead of just going to one doctor to reach a second opinion, or to two doctors to reach a second opinion, you can actually release it in the internet, and doctors can work like Uber drivers. They can actually, in their free time, open that application, reveal the file, and give their their ideas or their diagnosis. And if you think about this case, specifically in an uncontrolled environment like the internet, you might think that in some medical cases, few of the doctors will be experts, while the others won't be an expert. And if you just rely on the wisdom of the crowd and you just average over all of them, you can reach a wrong decision. Again, the idea is that those decisions are not distributed around a ground truth, but they represent a level of expertise that those experts have. And if you think, about other cases, legal cases that can be released in the internet, and even cases, if I go back to the idea that each one of us in 10, 20 years could be represented by a digital agent. Think about, again, a doctor that is making a decision, and there is a deep network agent that learns all the decisions that this person is making. After a while, this agent can, replace that doctor, can work instead of him, can work while this doctor is sleeping. Thinking, so in a way we could work while we are not physically there. Our digital image or digital agent could work for us. And again, it sounds maybe counterintuitive, but if you think about software, so company, they build software like ERP and so on, and then, the software is doing all the work that represent all the knowledge that was incorporated in it. And nobody expects, people from IBM or Oracle to make dynamic decision in ERP system. There is this software that represents all the knowledge that could be integrated in the software. In the same way, the AI agent at a personal level could work for each of us personally. And again, when you think about it, and you think about the internet, all those AI agents, again, you cannot just average them and ask for a wisdom of the crowd. What you really want to do is to find those experts in the crowd, depending on the decisions that you are trying to make, and either ignore all the others or give them a much higher weight when you make your decision. And the way that we approach this problem is to look how people make decisions collectively, and try to find some metric that represent the vicinity between experts. And I will use again the example I used before. Just think about a very specific medical case. You have a specific type of a lung cancer that you release to this crowd of experts. So if there are 2 or 3 doctors that are expert in this area, in many cases when they will encounter such a problem, they will be very consistent with each other. They will be close to each other. While all the other physicians, all the other doctors will be somehow distributed around many other decision or ideas. So if you can actually measure the distance between those experts along many decisions, you can easily find people that are expert in certain areas and give them a higher probability or a higher weight when you reach a decision. And actually we created, and maybe I can send it to you, a small application that it's a smartphone-based application that show you pictures of famous artists. And what you find out is that most of us, when they reach a paint of someone like Van Gogh or Picasso, certainly from a certain stage they can recognize it. But if people are requested to find some to classify those pictures of, let's say, Michelangelo or some earlier painters that are less known, you'll see that many of them are reaching wrong decision. And the idea is, again, to find those experts that can identify those paintings in a right way and use them to classify those piece of arts accordingly. And you'll see when you write, and I can send you the link of that application, and you'll immediately will get a score how you classify those piece of art. But I can actually send you the collective decision based on all of you, and you'll see that you can identify specific people that are very good in identifying specific painters or specific piece of art. And this actually represents many areas of knowledge that we are dealing with today. So this is the wisdom in the crowd, I would say, type of a project. So, I want to leave some few minutes just for question. I would sum and say that the role of AI in digital living is critical because, in fact, this is the mechanism that enable us to make decision in the digital modeling of the physical world. There are a lot of new opportunities when you think about applications that can be generated on large scale. So shared economy that started with companies like Airbnb and Uber can be spread around to many, many, many areas, like sharing food and sharing energy and sharing any resources, and do it in a smarter way. However, they all require an infrastructure that will gather a lot of data, that will make a smart decision based on AI system, and will know how to deliver it back in a way that people will be happy and will it will be efficient to work with. This type of application requires new models, new metrics, new measures that are not always relevant to the physical world that we used to work in so far. And and the last point I should mention, that it triggers also serious ethical question about making decisions that are not always under the engineering/computer science umbrella, but require also people from law and philosophy and many other science that could take part in this new organization of ideas and infrastructures and applications for the benefit of all of us, either in 2030 or 2040 and so on. So by that I will conclude my talk. I hope that I was clear, and I open it for any question if you have.
Professor, may I request you to please minimize the presentation on your screen and move on to the Q&A. Some viewers have posted questions.
Okay, so
You can go ahead and select the questions that you would like to answer.
okay, I don't see the Q&A. Guys, do you know where is the Q&A? Should I stop sharing or?
Yes, you could stop sharing. On the left side panel of your home screen, there should be a button for Q&A.
Okay, Q&A. Yeah, okay. I don't all this application.
Yes.
Okay, I open it. I don't know if you can see it, but
You could just read out the question you're about to answer, sir, and
I
people
would be
can
happy,
reply
but I don't see any question. I open the Q&A. There are polls and Q&A, but in Q&A I don't see any questions.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read out some of the questions that we can see on our portal.
Sure. Please go ahead.
All right. The first one is, how can we apply AI to electrical and electronic engineering?
So many examples, How can we apply AI, or can we apply AI? What was the specific question?
How? It's just how can we apply it to electrical engineering?
Okay, so it can start with the devices of we work with companies like HP, Applied Materials, Intel. They all use AI to optimize the smallest component in the system, to better sense what is going on there and to make the design of those components more adaptable to the environment, and it goes, up to large infrastructures, networks, and energy networks that again sense a lot of information and optimize the way that they are operating based on that. I can just give a very quick example. You know that in smart grid today, if I go to a larger system, when you want to transfer electricity from one point to another, it's not only a question of the different routes that you can select, and in many cases they are based on auctions. So many companies are proposing online some prices how to acquire those network links, but in many ways it is based on learning the demand of people to electricity. So you can find many different layers of AI that learn how people are using energy or electricity in this way, and what is the best way to optimize the system to provide it in a cost-effective way. So many areas are open in electrical engineering to the use of AI.
Thank you, Professor. Another question is, data is getting gathered in huge amounts. Could we have a framework where academia and government could make a portal which could have data dumps of all the data collected by them, and could this be used by any industry?
Yes, so this is a very good question, and actually is being taken place in some places. So for example, in Israel, the government made a decision to open some healthcare and medical databases for researchers in academia and in companies. It is based on the fact that in Israel we have a system where we collected data. Some of the HMOs are already collecting data for 20 or 15 years. And it's a small environment, so there is a lot of data points on patients. And this was a decision that once you release those data sets, it can actually increase innovation and enhance innovation. And in the same way, you can do it when you release information about transportation. In fact, in digital living, the whole idea is that if we have central databases that can represent reality, as I mentioned, in a digital way, you could actually open it to many companies and to academia to work on top of it and apply many new ideas and new research and application on top of that data. And we have such an example also in Tel Aviv University with the Smart Transportation Institute, that gather information from cellular providers, from leasing car companies, and general GIS systems in order to provide an infrastructure for smart transportation applications. So this is a very good way to increase collaboration and enhance innovation. Yes.
All right. So there is a question which is about one of the larger conclusions that you presented. How can AI trigger ethical questions?
How can AI, sorry?
Trigger ethical questions.
Oh. So, just think about all those decisions that are made by AI and will be made by AI in an automatic way. Just think about, the most trivial example is those autonomous vehicles that drive very fast and suddenly they censor a person crossing the street, and then can either hit that person or they can actually try to move to another lane with a very high probability that the people in the car will be injured. So this is a terrible, complicated ethical question. And the problem for us as human beings, if you think about it, is the idea that we have to somehow program it in advance and decide what we should do. So, if a car driver is driving and making a wrong decision, nobody will blame him. If he decides, he will be blamed on the fact that he maybe drove in a wrong way, but there will be no ethical question because, in fact, he got a decision in a few seconds. He had no time to think about it, no time to program it. But suddenly, this AI agent needs that someone will make those decisions, in a cold blood when he sits in an air-conditioned room and will write a code that will maybe cause a person crossing the road to be killed. And it raises a lot of questions. Can you do such a thing? Is it deterministic? How can you evaluate those probabilities? We talked about this issue, and we even thought that in some cases you need to allow some randomness effect, so people that believe in, randomness or God, or you can call it in any name, will have a chance to think that in some way there is an ethical decision that can be taken without analyzing it in advance and crashing into a very ethical problem that in some cases cannot be solved. And this is, of course, one example. You just think about distribution of goods, or the way that you, even a clear application, transportation, you decide that you give a priority to a certain lane in the road. Is it ethical? When you talk about public transportation, maybe it is ethical because more people are there. But when you think about smart cities, not always it is clear if more people will get advantage of that. And think about energy networks. Think about water networks. Think about all those networks that need to take you need to take a decision on, and they are all involved some question that could be ethical.
Okay, so another question, sir, is what's the role of AI in a circular economy?
In what? In economy?
A circular economy.
Okay, so first, I'm not familiar with the term circular economy, but of course, economy is based on the fact that you collect resources, demand, and supply from a lot of entities and you merge them together. And in this way, of course, AI is very important because it can help you understand the demand in a better way and provide you a better way to supply this demand. I didn't talk about circular economy, but in shared economy, which is a very important field, is totally based on AI. The fact that you can have a resource that can be utilized in a better way when you know better how people are using these resources is fully based on AI engines. I hope I answered some of these questions.
Yes, you did, sir. The last question is about, would the introduction of AI not reduce the significance of the human workforce, which would significantly hinder the personal growth of individuals based on knowledge coming with work experience?
Yeah. So, this whole part, I didn't have time to talk about it, but of course, and this is, by the way, another ethical question. Many tasks that people are performing could or would be performed by AI engine, robots, mechanism, and so on. And of course, it is related both to the fact that when you replace those people, you risk their work. And second, it is related to the question how people will work in those environments. And first, I think that a lot of jobs will be destroyed by AI, but at the same time, a lot of jobs will be created by AI. And like other, wave of revolutions that people thought that there will be no work, I think that also in the AI, people are exaggerating, and in a way, a lot of new jobs will be available. It is true, like any resource, it is true that there might be imbalance between developing and developed country, or poor area and richer area. I mean, countries or companies or individuals that will know how to better use AI will get a huge advantage, and that can create a lot of tension and ethical problems for those that will be left behind. And this is indeed a serious problem that we need to address. And part of it is related to the way that ethics should be part of it. At the same time, I think that if we will know how to address it, it will enable people to do things that they do better than AI agents. There are many, many areas that still are not covered by AI. You can think about consciousness, emotion, a lot of the decision that still people are doing better than AI, and I think that we'll find more and more people moving to those directions and using their experience to develop those directions. So I think that if we know how to control it well, eventually it can create a better environment also in the workspace.
All right, that was the last question, sir. We would like to extend our thanks to you, Professor, for an excellent presentation, and to all participants for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.